Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. It is the 12th of December, and I hope everybody is safe and well wherever you are. I do apologise if I was a little bit antsy in yesterday's video, but sometimes I just get a little bit frustrated when, there's a lot of hard work put into it. It doesn't necessarily mean that what I say is going to take place, obviously, but also it's providing evidence to back up the ideas that I'm providing. There's hours and hours of work analysing not just the European or the North Atlantic pattern, but the global picture to then try and greater understand what's going on. Then I try to deliver that to yourselves in the most straightforward way possible. We are going to start to see a change taking place, but I want to first and foremost talk about the fact that really this pattern is on repeat. It has been extending all the way back to the month of August. And if you look back at the various rotations of the Madden-Julian oscillation, you can see the rise and fall of both the Arctic oscillation and the North Atlantic oscillation. Really, as I've already said many times previous, that the MJO has played out very well, actually, by the way, so far over recent months. And the big test is going to come up as we move towards the heart of winter season. We're seeing seasonal adjustment, but we're seeing essentially the same pattern. It's a different version of the same pattern on repeat. And that has been the case since back in August. We've seen named storms, we've seen active jet streams, we've seen a lot of blockiness taking place as well. And it's very nicely the MJO, whether it be in the warm phases of 2 and 3 in the Indian Ocean, through the maritime continent phases 4 and 5, then it rotates further east into the west and central Pacific. That is the colder phases, as I've already said many times over, but I alluded to this in a little bit more detail in yesterday's video. But we are seeing some very interesting things going on. The anticyclonic loom back in November, we're essentially back in that blocky pattern. We're also in the same blocky pattern that delivered the flood and rain back in September, back in October, across parts of southern Europe. When you've got that block across central and northern Europe, then you've got the trough stuck underneath. And essentially we're seeing the same thing repeat itself, only the difference is the sun angle is much, much weaker between August versus what we have now in December. And you've got colder locked underneath that suppression of air mass underneath the center of high pressure. Obviously, winds blowing around this area of high pressure has been pulling up a lot of moisture off both Atlantic and the North Sea. Hence why we've had a lot of cloud cover across the majority of England, Wales, parts of Ireland. Also, while we've had clear skies across Scotland. Obviously, we've seen the development of fogginess within the Central Belt, for example, and other parts of Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland also, that has locked in the colder even further. With the sunshine and light winds, we've seen temperatures generally 2 or 3 Celsius above the freezing mark. In shelter, the temperatures have failed to get above freezing, during the course of the daytime. So this repeat cycle, but a different version of the same setup, is essentially what I think is taking place at the moment. But we're seeing another lobe of Arctic air, by the way, descending south over eastern North America. That is going to start to give this pattern a little bit of a kick. So like a flipping a skipping rope, you see the response from eastern North America, where we're seeing the initial changes taking place. This is where the source of change is taking place, is over eastern North America. We've got the Arctic air descending southwards. That is then reactivating the jet stream. We've got obviously a blocking area of high pressure across northern UK. We've got a trough stuck under Iberia. But what is going to happen is the changes that are taking place over eastern North America with a renewed lobe of Arctic air into the pattern here. That's then increasing the thermal imbalance, strengthening the strength of the jet stream. We've got a very amplified pattern, if you notice, at the moment. But this ripple effect across the Atlantic is what's going to help start to change the air mass over the eastern side of the Atlantic, western areas of Europe. Because as you see this jet then start this ridge starting to really bulge all the way up towards southern Greenland. We're seeing that trough to the south then start to merge with the area of high pressure, and you can see as we play all the way out to Friday, 13th of December. So this is tomorrow, obviously. You can start to see the changes overall taking shape, and then you start to see that jet starting to bulge its way across the North Atlantic. It kicks that area of high pressure to the east, and what's going to happen is we're going to start to see areas of low pressure moving in. We're reshaping the orientation of the upper pattern. The synoptic scale pattern is changing completely. Now we've got a jet stream racing up towards Iceland. We've got the area of high pressure now starting to relocate back towards the area that you would expect, i.e. towards the Azores. And therefore, we are going to start to see that much more positive North Atlantic oscillation setup as we move towards the early portions of next week. And you can see here as we play through, we've got that jet crossing over the northern UK. We're going to see wind, rain, and the rainfall totals will start to mount up across the west-facing areas of Ireland and UK, but especially across Scotland through the course of the next week or so here. We're going to start to see significant rainfall totals in excess of 100 millimetres, for example. But then, as you see here, we're much more flatter, low pressure to the north, higher pressure to the south here. We do have a bit of a split jet, if you notice, as it exits across North America. We've got one branch dipping south into the subtropical Atlantic. We've got another branch exiting from Canada across southern Greenland towards the UK. We're seeing these jet streams merge as it approaches both UK and Ireland here. And wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of beefy lows start to develop as we move towards the the 15th through the 20th period. But as I've said, phase 3, 4, 5 of the MJO is generally a warm pattern on the grand scheme of things. We do get local areas of cold, like we've seen in the past week or so here across northern UK, where we've been stuck underneath that area of high pressure and suppressed air. A big contrast between the tops of the Scottish mountains, for example, plus 3, 4, 5 Celsius, while there's sub-zero temperatures down at lower levels. A classic inversion when you've got this type of stagnant air mass in place. Without any wind, when you see the fog developing, the sun strength is at its weakest of the entire year, so therefore it can't dissipate that fog and traps in place that cold air. So it's been a rather stagnant, blocky type setup over the past wee while or so, but it's all thanks to this Arctic air that is going to be driving south east over the other side of the Atlantic. There's that Arctic air getting driven southwards, increasing the strength of the jet stream. That is then going to ripple its way across the Atlantic and change the overall setup. Now, as I said before, MJO moving through the warm phases at the moment, but you can see here off this graphic that I created a way back at the end of November, the correlation between the warm phases versus the cold phases of the MJO. Now, way back in the summertime, we had a null phase of the MJO. Was seen generally positive, but again, this is a completely different situation when you look at the MJO during the heart of summer versus the heart of winter. Very different correlation in terms of the output and the overall solution. But the first instance of a phase 3, 4, and 5, a warm phase of the MJO. So phases 3, 4, and 5, what are they? Let's have a quick look and see what they're looking. Basically, you're looking at the Indian Ocean here. So this is the Indian Ocean, Africa, Asia, and Australia, Indonesia. When you get a phase 2 and 3 of the Magellan Oscillation, you're in the central Indian Ocean. That tends to be a mild, sometimes a mild can actually be a mixture of somewhat colder, especially when you're coming off the cold phases. Phases 7 and 8, which is away out over the Central Pacific, they're cold phases. But when you see the eastward movement, the eastward propagation of the MJO, the enhanced convection areas of thunderstorm activity, for example, releasing heat up into the top of the atmosphere, then that starts to propagate the energy northwards. It interacts with the jet stream and affects the ridge trough pattern. the wavelengths, and all sorts of different things depending on that pulse of enhanced convection that runs along the equatorial belt. But phases 2 and 3 is generally in the Pacific. Phases 4 and 5 is over the maritime continent, so between Australia and Southeast Asia. Now, the cold phases are when you get into the central Pacific. So this is phase 4 and 5 over here. Then as you move towards the dateline, which is a 180 on the longitude line, that is the international dateline. And when you've got that enhanced convection over the dateline, which is phases 7 and 8, you generally have a greater probability of seeing both a negative Arctic oscillation and a negative North Atlantic oscillation. In phases 2, 3, and 4 and 5, that tends to correlate to a positive both in the Arctic oscillation and the negative North Atlantic oscillation. So you can see here off the ECM model. Now, my thinking was, and I mentioned this in yesterday's video, my concern about the cooling of the waters towards the west side of the dateline, because that may mean that the enhanced convection actually tries to become more focused over the warmer water. When you start to cool the East Pacific, that tends to kind of almost keep away the enhanced convection. Enhanced convection lift within the atmosphere tends to be attracted over warm sea surface temperatures. And as I've already said, I'm slightly concerned about this cooling over the Central Pacific, because that may mean that it focuses the MJ over phases 4 and 5 in the heart of winter. That is a warm phase. That is a positive NAO, AO, and tends to also strengthen the polar vortex as well. But you can see slight cooling over the Western Indian Ocean here. But look at the cooling that is taking place here to the west of the dateline. And that might not necessarily be a particularly good indicator. But one thing I want to make mention of is the fact that we've got very warm waters to the north of this here, north of the equator. And if you look at the ECMWF, there is actually indications here. Let's zoom this in to make it just a little bit easier. So the greens represent rising motion. The oranges represent sinking motion. So basically greens low pressure and oranges higher pressure. Now you notice here we've got a lot of widespread sinking over Europe and over Africa. A lot of rising motion, Eastern Indian Ocean through the maritime continent. So there is your phase 3 and 4. Let's have a look at this graphic. And you can see that we've got that phase 3, 4, and 5. We've done that rotation and we're quite amplified as well. The more amplified, the more influence it has or can have on the mid to high latitude pattern overall. But you can see that there is a bit of an indicator that we rotate into phases 6 in quite an amplified way. But there's also some subtle indication. Some members see this pulse of energy fade into the null phase and then re-establish itself over phases 7 and 8. And what I'm thinking is, if we look at this vertical velocity pattern chart here, you can see the greens here representing rising motion over the Australia region, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, for example. But we've also got enhanced upward motion to the north over these warm waters, which is rather interesting, actually. Look at these warm waters to the north of the equator, along the dateline here. So they're, it's not as if it's cooling waters in a widespread sense. We've got this skinny line of cold water here, this skinny little channel of cold, but there's a lot of warmth both to the north and to the south of that. And I'm wondering if, even though we're cooling the waters to the west of the dateline, which isn't a good thing for cold weather and, a negative AO, NAO, but you can see the warmer waters to the north, and that convection is actually kind of showing up according to the ECM model. You can see this convection. It kind of does fade right enough when you skip all the way out to Tuesday the 17th of the month, which is actually next Tuesday. This is the complicating factors that has to get taken into consideration. But if we look back at this graphic that, like I said, I've produced, Phases 3, 4, and 5 back in August, we had a positive Arctic oscillation. Phases 7, 8, and 1, we had a negative Arctic oscillation. We had cold second half of September, first half of October. Then the MJO rotated back into phases 3, 4, and 5. Arctic oscillation went positive. Then we've seen, especially during the second half of November, we've seen the rotation back through phases 8 and the 1, and we had the negative Arctic oscillation. So if we look at the NAO pattern, you can see that it's going positive. That would make sense given the rotation through the warm phases at the moment. This is the Arctic oscillation, though. You can see here it's going positive weekly and then starting to go back negative once again. So the period beyond the 20th still remains very open to question. And I'm very, very intrigued by what's going to take place here. So this is the latest of the ECMWF model showing the continuation of this rotation through phases 5. We're in phases 5 at the moment, which is over Indonesia. Then it rotates into phases 6, which is the West Pacific. It kind of fades as it moves towards phases 7, but we're already seeing indications of that rotation back towards the cold phases of 7, 8, and 1. And when we go into a cold 7, 8, and 1 phase of the MJO, we see the response. And there's been a very, very nice correlation between the MJO and the Arctic oscillation here. So this is me providing you with the evidence to back up the overall ideas. We know the jet stream is going to become more active. We're going to see high pressure towards the Azores, low pressure up towards Iceland, that positive NAO signal. But with that continued rotation towards the colder phases, the big question is, do we see the response before the Christmas New Year period, or does it come after that? Does it come maybe into the early portions, say New Year, and through the first week of January? Does it happen at all? Maybe it collapses and it doesn't re-emerge over the phases of 7 and 8. These are all questions that we don't know about. But generally speaking, I'm very pleased with the way things are at the moment. The cold spell that we've got over northern UK this week is in a generally milder theme overall. This is not a particularly cold pattern. It's just that we've got an area of high pressure at the weakest time of the year for the sun, and therefore we lock in the cold air naturally, and there's nothing to move it out of the way here. That's why it's turned colder across the northern UK. If you factor in further south here, those 850 temperatures, above Scotland are actually at +5, even though we've got temperatures double digits below freezing at night and below freezing throughout the course of the day, with freezing fog through the central belt. This is not necessarily a cold pattern, but it can get cold even in a slightly milder pattern. I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm not repeating myself too much here, but I want to kind of just re-emphasize what I've been saying all along here. So it's going to be interesting to see how the run up to Christmas goes. I'm pretty confident as we go through the course of this week, we'll start to reactivate that jet. We'll start to reorientate the upper air synoptic setup across the East Atlantic. In other words, we're going to lose the high pressure with low pressure to the north. Higher pressure is going to regroup to the south. We're going to get westerly winds, wet conditions across parts of Western Ireland and UK, and a generally mild theme overall. Question mark will be, as we move towards the 20th through the 31st of December, where is the MJO going to be, and what type of pattern are we going to see in response to that? So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Be sure to drop a comment and let me know what you thought. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time with more. Bye for now.